This is a true story told on a forum dedicated to discussing Bigfoot in 2008. Hey everyone, I've been a member of this forum for a while, but I've never shared much of my personal story here. I've read countless accounts of Bigfoot sightings over the years, and always thought they were either hoaxes or just exaggerated tales from people with wild imaginations. That was until I had an experience of my own. Let me give you some context first. I grew up in the Appalachian Mountains, right in the heart of the region where the trees seem to stretch on forever and the mist hangs heavy over the valleys. It's a place where the wilds are untamed, and the landscape feels like it hasn't changed for centuries. My family has lived here for generations, and I've spent more time in the woods than I can count, hunting, fishing, and hiking through the mountain trails. There's a kind of peace you get from being surrounded by all that wilderness, but there's also something else. Something not quite right. We're a tight-knit community out here, and people don't usually talk about things they can't explain. Growing up, I heard plenty of local legends, stories about strange creatures that supposedly lurk deep in the woods, hidden from the world. Some people called them wild men. Others whispered about Bigfoot sightings. But I never put much stock in it. I always figured they were just old mountain folklore, tales to scare kids into staying close to home. That is, until about 2 years ago. I was out on a hike, as I often do, when I saw something that made me question everything I thought I knew. I'm here now to share what happened. Maybe some of you will think I'm crazy, but I can't keep this to myself any longer. I don't know if anyone will believe me, but I feel like I need to get it off my chest. If you've had an encounter, or if you've ever been in the Appalachian woods at night, you might understand where I'm coming from. I'll start with the first time I saw something that didn't belong in the woods. It was a typical Saturday morning in late autumn, the kind of morning where the chill in the air bites at your skin, but the sun is just strong enough to warm you through. I had decided to take a solo hike along one of my favorite trails, a quiet stretch through the woods that takes you up to a small ridge overlooking a valley. I'd walked that trail dozens of times before, so I knew it well. Nothing out of the ordinary ever happened there, and that's why I liked it. It was peaceful, undisturbed. As I walked, the crunch of dead leaves beneath my boots was the only sound that broke the silence of the forest. The trees around me were mostly bare, their branches twisted and gnarled from years of exposure to the harsh Appalachian winters. There was a heavy mist hanging in the air, creeping slowly between the trunks, and it made the forest feel otherworldly, like something from a dream. I'd only been walking for about 30 minutes when I noticed something strange. A movement up ahead. It wasn't the usual scampering of squirrels or rustling of birds. It was slow and deliberate, almost as if whatever was out there knew I was coming. At first, I thought it might be a deer or some other animal, but then I saw it more clearly. There, just beyond a cluster of trees, standing at the edge of the trail, was a figure. I froze. I couldn't make out all the details, but it was huge, easily 8 or 9 feet tall. The figure was covered in dark, matted fur, and it was standing perfectly still, almost as if it was waiting for me to notice it. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its eyes on me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. For a moment, I thought it might be a man in a costume, some kind of prank. But there was something unsettling about the way it moved. It didn't have the shape of a human, nor did it have the typical movement patterns of an animal. Its posture was too upright, too deliberate, and the way it blended into the shadows made it seem almost part of the forest itself. I stood there, unsure of what to do. My heart was racing in my chest, and my mind was trying to rationalize the situation. Was it really a Bigfoot? I didn't want to believe that, but the longer I stared, the more I couldn't deny it. There was something primal about the encounter, something that told me this was no joke. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the creature turned and disappeared into the woods with a speed that I couldn't comprehend. One moment, it was there, standing like a giant sentry, and the next, it was gone, leaving only an eerie silence in its wake. I didn't move at first, my feet rooted to the ground, my mind racing. After what felt like an eternity, I slowly backed away, not taking my eyes off the spot where it had stood. My breath was shallow, and every part of me screamed to run, but I somehow stayed still. Eventually, I turned and made my way back down the trail. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me the entire time. It wasn't until I got back home that I realized just how much my hands were shaking. I tried to tell myself it was just a trick of the light or my imagination running wild, but deep down, I knew what I had seen, and I knew that it wasn't something I could easily forget. Since that day, I haven't been able to go back to those woods without feeling that same weight on my chest, that same sense that something's out there, watching, waiting. I'll be honest, I haven't told many people about this. Some friends and family would just laugh it off, and the locals around here, well, they tend to keep their stories close to the chest. There's a lot of history in these hills, and some things people just don't talk about. But I knew after that day that I wasn't the only one who had seen something. After that encounter, things started to change. Not just the way I looked at the woods, but the way I looked at everything. It felt like the mountains had a secret, one that I wasn't meant to know. And even though I tried to shake the feeling, the more I thought about it, the more I realized how many people in the area had similar stories. Around here, folks are quiet, not just about Bigfoot, but about everything. They keep their business to themselves. But there's one thing that's hard to ignore: the stories. The older folks especially have a lot of tales from years past. Some of them are about strange creatures living in the depths of the woods. The wild men, as they call them, have been a part of the Appalachian folklore for centuries. I remember when I was younger, my grandmother used to tell me stories by the fire. It was always the same: of mysterious beings that roamed the forests, huge and powerful, covered in hair. She would speak of them in hushed tones, almost like she was afraid someone might overhear. And while she never explicitly said it was Bigfoot, I could tell she was talking about something more than just a tale to scare children. There was a kind of reverence in her voice, a respect for something ancient and powerful. I never thought much of it at the time. I figured these stories were just old legends, passed down from one generation to the next, meant to keep kids out of the woods or remind them to respect the wild. But now, I'm not so sure. I started hearing whispers from neighbors and folks down at the general store. They didn't speak openly about Bigfoot, but if you listened closely, you could hear it. Stories of large, shadowy figures spotted in the distance, of strange sounds at night that no one could explain. Some said they had seen something that wasn't quite human, something that moved too quickly, too silently through the trees. Others spoke of unnerving growls echoing through the mountains, sounds that didn't match anything they knew of. One evening, while I was at the local diner, I overheard an old man, one of the local hunters, talking to a younger guy. He was telling the kid, almost in a warning tone, that if you hear something that doesn't sound right, you get out of there. Fast. The kid laughed it off, but the old man's face didn't change. He just stared at him like he was trying to pass on some kind of unspoken wisdom. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces started to fall into place. All these years, people had been seeing something. They just didn't talk about it, didn't want to seem crazy. The idea of Bigfoot had always seemed like a joke to me, but now I wasn't so sure. What if the creature I saw that day wasn't just some isolated incident? What if there was something more to these old stories, something the locals had known about for generations, but had never spoken of out loud? The more I listened, the more I realized that the Appalachian Mountains were hiding something that had been here long before any of us. But no one was talking, not in detail at least. It was like a secret everyone knew, but no one dared to speak of openly. I had to know more, so I started asking around. Quietly, of course. People in town are proud of their history, their stories, but they don't always want to talk to strangers. I figured it was best to start slow, asking people I trusted. But every time I mentioned Bigfoot, people's eyes would narrow and the conversation would change. There were two kinds of responses. One, people would laugh it off, saying it was all made up. Or two, they'd look away and change the subject, as if they'd seen something they didn't want to acknowledge. I knew I wasn't going crazy. I had seen something real. Now, I just had to figure out what it was. The more I thought about it, the more it became clear that I couldn't shake the feeling that the Appalachian Mountains themselves were a character in this story. It wasn't just the stories people told or the strange encounters people whispered about. It was the land itself. These mountains are ancient, far older than anything we can comprehend. When you stand at the edge of the ridges and look out over the endless forests, you get the sense that you're staring into something timeless, something that hasn't been disturbed by modern life. I grew up knowing the landscape, but after my encounter, it felt different. Every twist in the trail, every rustling in the leaves felt like it could be something more than just nature at work. I began to see the woods in a new light, not just as a place I'd spent countless hours in, but as a territory that belonged to something else. If you've never been to the Appalachians, you might not understand what I mean. It's a vast wilderness, filled with dense forests that seem to swallow up all light. There are valleys so deep and narrow, you could get lost for days and never find your way out. There are caves and rock formations hidden all around, some so remote that even the locals don't know about them. People have disappeared in these mountains, and there are stories of strange sounds echoing from deep within the woods, sounds that aren't easily explained. The mountain ridges are covered with ancient trees, their thick canopies forming dark tunnels in places where the sun barely reaches the ground. Trails wind through the forest, sometimes leading to unexpected clearings, but more often than not, they just disappear into the vastness of the woods. It's easy to get lost out there if you don't know where you're going. And maybe that's the point. It's a place that seems designed to keep its secrets hidden. The thing about the Appalachian Mountains is that they have a way of making you feel small. The trees tower above you, and the silence of the woods is overwhelming. There's a stillness that comes with being deep in the forest, a feeling like time itself slows down, and you're just a small part of something much bigger. It's easy to get lost in the beauty of the landscape, but it's also easy to forget how wild and unpredictable the land can be. There's a lot of history here, too. The mountains were once home to indigenous tribes, and even now you can find signs of their presence in the form of ancient rock carvings and hidden burial sites. The early settlers, too, lived off the land, carving out small farms and homes in the most remote corners of the region. But the isolation that made these mountains a refuge also made them a place where strange things could happen. It's easy to understand how stories of mysterious creatures, spirits, and otherworldly beings could take root in a place like this. There are places here that feel wrong. Even when the sun is shining and the air is calm, there are areas of the woods where the trees grow so close together that you can hardly see through them. And when the mist rolls in, thick, white, and dense, it can be disorienting. It's as if the world around you shrinks, and you're left with nothing but the sound of your own breath and the occasional crack of a branch underfoot. And that's the thing. The woods are full of things we can't explain. The older folks around here talk about the deep woods, areas so untouched by humans that even animals avoid them. It's in these places that people report hearing strange noises, seeing strange shapes, or simply feeling like they're being watched. I used to laugh it off, but after what happened to me, I began to understand why those stories existed. The more I talked to people, the more I realized that the Appalachian Mountains aren't just a backdrop to these stories. They're a character in their own right. The land is as much a part of the mystery as anything else. It's wild, untamed, and ancient. And I started to wonder, could it be hiding something? Something the people who live here have known about for centuries? There's a certain energy to this place. And that energy, it doesn't feel like it comes from the earth or the trees. It feels like it's something older, something watching, waiting. I started to think about my encounter more deeply. Could that creature I saw have been something that had lived here for as long as the land itself? Was it part of the mystery that's woven into the very fabric of the mountains? I couldn't ignore it anymore. I needed to know. After my encounter, I found myself going back to the trail more often than I had before. I couldn't stay away. Something about the experience kept pulling me back, like there were answers out there that I had to find, even if I wasn't sure what I was looking for. I had to see if I could make sense of it, or at least get a clearer picture of what I had witnessed. I kept telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, that maybe I was just overtired from hiking in the mist. But deep down, I knew what I had seen. A week after the encounter, I decided to return to the same stretch of trail. It wasn't the smartest move, I admit, but I couldn't let the fear control me. I wasn't going to let some shadowy figure ruin something I had loved my entire life. The morning was cold, crisp, and clear, the kind of autumn day when the leaves are at their brightest. The forest floor a patchwork of red, orange, and yellow. I had my usual gear, a backpack, a water bottle, and my camera, just in case I needed proof. Not that I was expecting to capture anything. I was still skeptical, even after what I had seen. I hiked for a few hours, just like I'd done countless times before, the familiar rhythm of the trail helping to calm my nerves. But when I reached the same area where I had seen the creature, something caught my eye. There, partially obscured by a fallen log, were footprints. Not just any footprints, but massive prints, easily 3 times the size of my own boots. My heart skipped a beat as I crouched down to examine them more closely. They were deep, as though something heavy had been walking through this spot, and the shape of the toes was unmistakably human, or at least humanoid. The tracks were wide, with a distinct arch that didn't match any animal I'd ever seen. I followed the prints for a few yards, each step more unsettling than the last. The prints led me toward the edge of the trail, where the forest thickened. They weren't neat and orderly like a human's would be, nor were they erratic like an animal's might be. They seemed to follow a deliberate path, as if the creature knew exactly where it was going. My breath caught in my throat as I crouched to examine the ground further. The prints were unmistakable, and they weren't recent. They had been there for days, maybe longer. The edges of the prints had started to fill in with dirt and leaves, but the depth was still evident. I pulled my camera out of my pack, snapping a few pictures as I carefully documented the evidence. It was hard to believe what I was seeing. Could this really be from the creature I had seen? Was this proof that something was moving through these woods? As I stood up, I felt a chill creep down my spine. I wasn't alone. I couldn't see anything, but I had the distinct feeling of being watched, as though those invisible eyes were on me once more. My gut told me to leave, that I had what I needed. But my curiosity won out. I pressed on. I followed the trail for a while longer, trying to ignore the sense of unease that seemed to grow with every step. The forest around me was eerily quiet, the usual sounds of birds and squirrels absent, like the entire place had gone still. My boots crunched on the fallen leaves, the only sound that cut through the silence. Eventually, the trail veered off the main path and led me deeper into the trees. I could feel the weight of the woods around me, pressing in from all sides. The sunlight struggled to break through the canopy above, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward me. The further I went, the more isolated I felt, like the world outside the forest had faded away. And then, I found it. A large tree, its bark torn and scratched in a way I couldn't explain. It was as though something had scraped its claws down the trunk, leaving deep gashes in the wood. They were rough, jagged marks, not the kind of damage you'd see from a bear or any other animal. These marks were too deliberate, too purposeful. I ran my fingers along the edges of the scratches, the rough texture sending a shiver through me. I looked up at the tree, and that's when I saw something else. A strange, odd smell in the air, like wet earth mixed with something musky, almost animalistic. It was then that I realized I had found more than just clues. I had stumbled upon a sign of territory. This was no random animal. This was something marking its domain. And that's when the weight of it hit me. The creature I had seen wasn't just wandering the woods. It was living here. It was claiming this land as its own. I didn't stick around much longer after that. I turned around, feeling the eyes of the woods on me, and made my way back to the trail, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't deny it anymore. There was something in these woods, and it wasn't just a legend. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see were those massive footprints, the deep gashes in the tree, and that unsettling feeling of being watched. It was like the woods were calling to me, daring me to uncover whatever secrets they held. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I had to be careful. This wasn't some harmless curiosity. Whatever was out there wasn't just a figment of my imagination. I'd found proof, undeniable evidence that something strange was living in the mountains. The next day, I reached out to a few people in town, trying to find anyone who had experienced something similar. The local store was a good place to start, as it's the hub for gossip and local chatter. People there tend to speak openly, especially after a few cups of coffee and some casual conversation. I ran into Bill, a guy I'd known since I was a kid. He was sitting at one of the tables by the window, sipping his coffee. He looked up when I walked in, and I could tell something was off. His eyes were wide, his face pale. "Hey, Bill," I said, sitting down across from him. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Bill didn't laugh. Instead, he just stared at me for a second, then glanced around the diner before speaking in a low voice. "You ever been out past the old mill trail?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I nodded. "A few times. Why?" He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "A couple weeks ago, I was up there with my nephew. We were hunting near the ridge, just off the trail. It was late afternoon, the sun was setting, and we heard something. A sound, like a growl, but not from any animal I've ever heard. It was low, deep, and it rattled my bones. My nephew was freaked out, said he saw something moving between the trees. I didn't see anything, but I swear to God, something was out there. It was watching us." My curiosity piqued. I leaned forward. "What did you do?" Bill's eyes narrowed, and he looked down at his coffee cup. "We didn't wait around to find out. We left. Fast." I could tell he wasn't joking. There was a seriousness in his tone that made my stomach drop. Bill wasn't one to embellish stories. If he said something was out there, I believed him. "You think it could have been what I saw?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Could be. I'm not saying it was Bigfoot, but something big, something that doesn't belong in these woods. There's something wrong about it, something ancient, something that doesn't want us here. People have been talking about it for years, but no one says much, you know? If you hear something, you just leave. You don't go looking for answers." I felt a chill run down my spine. It was the same kind of warning I had gotten from the old man at the diner a few weeks ago. Get out if you hear something. Don't stick around. I couldn't just let it go, not after what I had seen and what I had found. There was something out there in those woods, and it wasn't just some mythical creature. It was real, and it was living among the trees, deep in the heart of the Appalachian wilderness. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn deeper into something I couldn't control. I tried to focus on work and daily life, but I couldn't ignore the nagging thought that there was a presence in the woods, something I hadn't fully understood yet. I spent hours researching the creature. I dug into old reports and even read up on Native American legends about wild men and forest spirits. I found something that caught my attention. A reference to an ancient creature called the Waya, a creature believed to live in the deepest parts of the Appalachian Mountains. According to the legend, the Waya was a large humanoid creature, much like Bigfoot, but older. It was said to be able to move between the physical world and the spirit world, existing just beyond the edge of reality. I didn't know what to think about it. Was the creature I had seen tied to these ancient legends? Or was it something else entirely? Whatever it was, it seemed to be tied to the land itself, a part of the mountains that didn't want to be disturbed. A week after my conversation with Bill, I decided to go back to the ridge. The more I thought about it, the more I knew I needed to get closer to the truth. I couldn't let fear stop me, not when I was so close to understanding what was really out there. But I wasn't going alone this time. I called my old friend, Jake, who'd been hunting in these woods for years. He was skeptical about my story, but after hearing Bill's tale, he agreed to join me. We'd go up there together, just to see what we could find. I couldn't shake the feeling that the creature was still out there, watching, waiting. And this time, I wasn't just going to wait for it to show itself. I was going to face it head on. Jake and I met early the next morning. The air was thick with mist, and the sky was still a deep shade of purple as the sun began to rise behind the ridges. It was the perfect kind of morning for something strange to happen, the kind that made you feel like you were walking on the edge of reality. My nerves were on edge, but I tried not to show it. I knew if I was going to find answers, I had to keep a level head. This wasn't just about proving what I'd seen, it was about understanding what was living out there. We met at the trailhead near the old mill trail, where Bill had mentioned hearing that growl. Jake wasn't quite as convinced as I was, but he was curious. And if nothing else, he liked the idea of being able to tell a good story when we got back to town. "All right, man, you lead the way," Jake said, his voice carrying that easygoing tone he always used, though I could tell there was a hint of uncertainty behind it. He wasn't taking me seriously, but he was going along with it for the adventure. "Stick close," I replied, my voice steady but low. "We don't know what's out there." We began our hike up the ridge. The ground was damp from the mist, and the forest seemed alive with the sound of dripping water. There was an eerie quiet in the air, the kind that you only get in places untouched by modern life. Birds weren't singing, the wind wasn't rustling the leaves, the woods felt like they were holding their breath. We followed the trail, heading deeper into the mountains, with every step feeling heavier, like the forest was pulling us in. There were no signs of wildlife, no deer, no squirrels, not even a rustling in the brush. Just silence. As we pressed on, Jake finally broke the quiet. "Man, this place is creeping me out," he said, his voice cutting through the stillness. "Where are all the animals?" I didn't have an answer for him. I had noticed it too, but I didn't want to admit how strange it was. The absence of life was unsettling, and it only made me more aware of the shadows lurking in the trees. We reached the point where I had found the large footprints and the tree with the claw marks. I paused, scanning the area. It was hard to describe, but something about this spot didn't sit right with me. I wasn't sure if it was the silence or the way the light filtered through the trees, but everything felt wrong. "You sure this is the spot?" Jake asked, looking around. I nodded. "This is it, right here." We both crouched down to examine the ground. The prints were still there, faded but still visible, and the tree with the deep gouges in the bark stood a few feet away. As we inspected the area, I felt my pulse quicken. The place was marked, that much was clear. But the longer I looked, the more I started to feel that familiar sensation, the feeling of being watched. "I don't know about you," Jake said, standing up, "but this doesn't feel like an animal's doing. It's too deliberate." I agreed. The claw marks were too clean, the way the prints led off the path too purposeful. This wasn't some bear or mountain lion. Whatever had left them was more than just an animal. We decided to follow the trail a little further. The tracks didn't lead far. They stopped near a small clearing where the ground had become soft and muddy. I felt my heart beat faster as I knelt to inspect the area. There were more prints, larger than before, and deeper, as though whatever had passed through here had been heavier, more powerful. But there was something else. In the middle of the clearing, there was a pile of broken branches. At first, I thought it was just the result of a fallen tree or a windstorm. But as I looked closer, I realized it wasn't natural. The branches were twisted, as if something had deliberately snapped them and piled them together in a small mound. It was too organized to be the result of any storm. I stood up, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. "Jake, come here." He walked over and crouched down to examine the pile. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, running his hand over the broken branches. I didn't know what to say. It didn't feel like a warning or an animal's den, but something else entirely. It was like the creature was saying, "I'm here." We didn't speak much as we continued to search the area. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the edge of something much bigger than we realized. The forest was silent again, and the air had grown colder, as though it was holding something in check. Then, just as I was about to turn around and head back, I heard it. A deep, guttural growl. It was low and resonating, echoing through the trees with a power that made the ground beneath me vibrate. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before. Not a bear, not a mountain lion. This was something different. Jake and I froze. My heart skipped a beat as I turned to him. He was looking at me, his eyes wide, his face pale. "We need to go," he whispered, his voice tight with fear. But before we could even move, there was another sound. A branch snapping, followed by something heavy moving through the trees. It was close, closer than I'd ever expected. We weren't alone anymore. The end of part 1.